Please welcome with me Mr. Kazim Erdogan.
A very good morning to all of you. It is a real honor for me to speak to such an audience. Perhaps before I begin, I could just say that holding talks isn't really my forte, which is why I prefer to work in the area of projects. And I allow these projects to speak for me rather. So to make sure you understand what I'm trying to say, perhaps I'll just tell you a little incident that took place on the Berlin in Munich station. I was 21. I arrived in Munich and I wanted to go to West Berlin. It was 1974. And after about 3/4 of an hour, I felt like a helpless child because I didn't speak English then, and I still don't speak it today, and I didn't speak German then either. And I was trembling. I just didn't know what to do. So I started to seek help in that situation. I found where I started looking for somebody who was also from an ethnic minority, and I looked for some guest workers, as they called them in Germany, and after 15 minutes I found one, and I asked him in Turkish whether he was a Turk. He said he was. And I said, look, I'm trying to go to West Berlin. And he said to me, so? And I said, my brother, what do you mean, so? Can you come with me to the counter and help me buy a ticket? He did it. And when he spoke German, I thought he was speaking German as if it was his native language. I was so enthusiastic about it. But then, after a year, I spoke some German. What I realized is how miserable his German actually had been. He spoke as follows: ticket, travel, Berlin, you give. Yes, like this. But I thought he was brilliant. And he sort of built a bridge for me, in a sense, and even while I was traveling on the train, I decided as soon as I had the necessary tools that I wanted to volunteer in the same manner and help people. And for 43 years now, I have been working consistently as a volunteer, and I would do it all again if I had my druthers. It's been a wonderful approach. Now, if I had all day, I could tell you about every single one of my projects, but I don't. But I'm going to just speak to you briefly, maybe for a quarter of an hour, and then take your questions. I'm going to talk to you about my father's group. You may know that the men from Turkey have a very bad reputation, and that for 50 or 60 years now, we have written about this group of people without actually talking to these people. And this was an attempt to change things. And the reason is quite straightforward. Domestic violence has increased in our world. In Turkey, women are beaten, women are murdered, children are beaten. And we can't just close our eyes and pretend that this issue has nothing to do with us. And we are living in a society without fathers. I could even go further and say that we live in a world without fathers in some ways, because 99% of the experts in the primary schools, the teachers, the workers in nursery schools are female. And I very much appreciate what they do and their qualification. But in order to raise our children properly, the fathers have to be involved. Men have to be involved. The fathers have to take responsibility. Education without men and raising children without fathers, it's just like having only one leg. It's not enough. And this is why in 2007, I set up the first group for Turkish fathers. And there's no issue that we don't talk about here, but there are 3 priority areas that we work on. The concept of honor, raising children without violence, and peaceful coexistence in a society with immigration. These are issues we look at. Of course, we talk about all manner of other things as well that crop up in our lives. We now have 7 groups in Berlin. I've set up a group in Austria, and in other areas in Germany, groups have been founded as well. And my wish would be that in every city, in every part of the world, we would set up groups like this so that the children and women in these communities are doing better. If I were to talk to you about all of the things that we do, I'd be here till the cows come home. So let me just give you 2 specific examples of why it's very much worth working for other people, doing things for other people like this. I once asked one participant about Abe. I said, "Since when have you been married?" He said, 46 years. And I said, "Mashallah, may God protect you from the evil eye." And then I said, "Have you ever bought your wife a bouquet of flowers?" And he said, "What on earth do you mean, Mr. Erdogan?" And I said to him, "Listen, you've got some homework. Promise me that you'll do this homework." And he said, "I swear on Allah, I will do this." I said, "Okay, after this meeting, buy your wife a bouquet of flowers. Promise me you'll do it." And he said he would. And he did indeed buy some flowers on his way home, walked into the flat, and wanted to take off his shoes just outside the door. And his wife noticed that she was coming in and saw the flowers and said, "Dursun, what's that?" And Dursun said, "It's a bouquet of flowers. I bought it for you." And his wife said, "Dursun, be perfectly honest. Was this Mr. Erdogan's idea?" And now, whenever there's a special occasion, Dursun buys his lovely wife a bouquet of flowers. Here's another example. As you all know, there are mail-order brides, as it were, or rather import marriages, better to say. People go to Turkey, marry somebody, and bring them back, and then their wives lived here. So I have a participant who was imported as a groom, basically. He came to Nuremberg. After a short period of time, he separated from his wife. He couldn't stand that they were going to be separated, wanted to be violent. But so that he not be violent, he came to Berlin and came to our father's group. And after 3 years, he found out that his ex-wife had a new partner. And he pops a gasket, puts some weapons in his car, and drives towards Nuremberg. And he stops at a filling station, at a service station, for a break. Suddenly he remembers all of the talks that we had, that violence never leads to any positive resolution, that violence is just not an option. And he turned around and drove back to Berlin. And on Monday evening, he came into our group and told us the story. These are all small things in a way. But the biggest problems that we have here on this planet is a lack of communication, not finding a voice, not finding a way to talk to one another. And we've got to do something against this, I think. Now, when I was studying, I met 4 or 5 new people every day, talked to one another. But of course, that doesn't happen in today's world in the same way. You know, we travel on the underground, maybe we see 40, 50 people, and they're all talking with their mobile phones, or 30 people listening to music, 10 people who are reading the newspaper, and 20 people who stare at the floor with a sad expression, as if their boat had sunk on the Black Sea. This is why we must do more together to improve communication. But if we are to communicate properly with other people, we need to have the right tools to do so. I have 4 tools that I rely on, that I always have with me. In my left trouser pocket, I have the tool of speaking to one another on an equal footing and in a language each can understand. And this is true for every language. You have to speak in a way that other people will understand. And in my right trouser pocket, I have the tool which is understand what sort of place people are in at the moment and address them in that manner, in a way that is appropriate to them. And exploratory work, in a way. I'm not talking about psychological or sociological work. It's just reaching out to people, speaking to people directly, ringing them up, getting them on board for your project. But the best tools in the world can never give you a guarantee for success. If you haven't got spare parts, you're not going to be able to get what you need. So my favorite spare parts are recognition, acceptance, appreciation, trust, tolerance. I could continue. The list is long. You can have thousands of different spare parts, really. But 2 spare parts that I'd like to emphasize are the concepts that I would say are shame and humiliation. I think in the history of migration, these concepts haven't played a major role. People who are embarrassed about their situation, they won't go into these institutions. They won't use these resources. They won't enter into contact with other people. But if, in the way that we behave, we humiliate people, we make them feel shame, they'll never come back to us. They will stay away from any measures available to them. And this is why it's so incredibly important that we pay attention to the spare parts, as it were, and that we ensure that we do not incur shame in other people. Let me just give you another example. You can see here a lovely T-shirt with mustaches. It says, "The mustaches of Anatolian men can turn into angels' wings." We have 7,000 T-shirts like this and wore them all and demonstrated against violence. Our last demonstration was on the 16th of January 2016 after certain events in Cologne, Stuttgart and Hamburg. Wherever there's any violence, we must condemn it and combat it. And of course, I would have liked to have seen 20,000 people on the streets, Muslim people, Muslim men on the streets demonstrating against violence. But we didn't stop there. Now, I could talk to you for hours and hours until you're all completely fast asleep, but that's really not the way to go about it. So I think I'm going to just wrap up now and very much hope that you haven't all glazed over. And I look forward to your valuable questions. Thank you very much.
Buongiorno, sono Serena, vengo da Barreca, dall'Italia, e volevo chiedere.
Hello. Hello there. I come from Italy, and I just wanted to ask you regarding the importance of organizing groups for men. I mean, the example that you gave us, for example, about the bouquet of flowers. Have you tried to organize groups for these women who are just not used to that sort of thing, or not used to being sort of, made a fuss of and getting flowers, etc.? That was my question. Well, apart from the fathers' groups, we've got lots of groups for mothers and for women. And then sometimes we bring the men and the women together. So that means sometimes mainly we meet separately, but we regularly meet together and discuss these things with groups of men and women. And I almost forgot to say that the group is led by a man and a woman at all times. So that means we never blend out the view of the women and the mothers. So we have to make sure that we haven't, got it all wrong. And this is why we always ask, the colleague who I run this group with, I always ask her perspective as well. And we're basically doing this for everyone in society. We're trying to do something. We're well aware of the fact that the problems that we're engaging with our men here are problems that very, very many men, if not nearly all men, have across the globe. There are different cultures, different customs, but it's an issue for the entire world. So we need to tackle it all together. Was that okay as an answer?
Yeah. Von dem, was ich bis jetzt gehört habe.
Well, based on what I've heard so far, you seem to be a wonderful person, a really kind person. So the question I have is, what about the really hard nuts to crack, as it were? You've got some people who just aren't open for conversations like that. How do you deal with them? Well, whether or not I'm a kind, wonderful person, you don't know that. Wait till I finish speaking and then decide. No, I'm kidding. But, you sometimes hear that, you can squeeze a stone, but you can't squeeze a Turkish man and get anything out of him. But that's not true. If you create a conducive environment, and if this environment reflects reality, if you've got the right environment, these people are actually open. They open up. It just takes them an hour or something to open up, and then they do. How often in the last 10 years have I had dozens of men that sat there for hours in the meetings with 30, 40 other men crying their eyes out at some point once they realized what they had done to their children, what they'd done to their wives. So there I would say to you, do not judge people for what they have done, but encounter them on an equal footing and communicate human warmth to them. Whatever they've done. Of course, we criticize behavior, but we don't damn the people. If you're in Berlin or in Germany, let me welcome you to come along. Be our guest. Talk with these men. See for yourself how tough Turkish men can open their hearts and begin to cry.
Guten Tag, mein Name ist Elina.
Hello there. I'm Elena. I come from Kazakhstan, and the problems of domestic violence are ones that we know in our country. And my question to you is, how do you judge the training for specialists running these groups? I mean, you were saying it's not just in Germany that you want to organize these groups, but across the globe. I mean, is there a program for how to organize such a group?
Also die Frage der Kollegin war, dass sie dann wissen möchte, ob wir ein Bildungsprogramm haben für die sozusagen Fachkräfte, die die Gruppen leiten. Ob sowas gibt, ich versuche es zu schildern, dass wir was Deutschland.
Let me try and tell you what we've got for Germany. For Germany, we have indeed developed a program for our groups. We are training up 20 experts on weekends in further training sessions so that they will have the skill sets necessary to run these groups. And we're currently working on a plan to look at the most important issues that we want to tackle in these groups, and then we want to make this available to other people in other countries. That's what we're planning to do. But the biggest problem that we're confronted with is that we don't really have much of a budget to do any of this. But I very much hope that after today's meeting, many colleagues who come from other countries will connect with me so that we can network and come up with a program for the whole world. How's that for modest?
Yes, hello. My name is Marielle, and I want to ask you, first, your number one tool that you put in your right pocket, which is speaking to one another on an equal footing. First, I want to say I'm very happy to hear you say that's your number one tool. My question is, do you teach this number one tool to the men in your groups in regards to their wives? And if so, how is that done?
Ja, wie machen wir das? Wir fangen von null an.
How do we do this? Well, we start from scratch, then we start offering kind of educational inputs. We look at what our parents, our ancestors, and our relations, and what have they all taught us. That's where we start. So we start with the concept of honor. Honor is something every Turkish man thinks they understand, and they use it 5 times a day. But it's a concept that they have just absorbed, but it's actually empty. If you say, what does honor really mean for you? You don't actually get a decent response. They just tell you what your parents told you. You're a man, you have to have honor, you have to protect your honor. And the question that we ask there is, what about the women? What about the children? Do they have no pride? Do they have no value? And then we try to sort of fill this empty concept out. We've tried to pursue the idea of, what is a person, what is there that's sort of honor and value? And we try to sort of look for concepts, not just something a man has, that others have, wanting to help other people, not turning a blind eye, helping your neighbors, not backstabbing people, not stealing, etc., etc., etc. And the men who come along to my group no longer constantly describe the concept of honor the way they would have done 10 years ago. Now they would name these qualities that I've discussed rather than saying, I'm a man and I have honor. Basically, we're working on awareness raising here, but not just forcing things on people, but saying, you belong to us. We learn from one another, not I'm up here and you're down there. And I've sort of, through these groups, have kind of adult education, if you like. They taught me. It's as if I'd gone through an adult education course from them. So I've learned from them as well as they've learned from me. And that's what I mean when I say on an equal footing. Not like I'm up here talking down to you down there and I know everything, but rather working together, sitting in a group on wooden chairs and talking. I'm Verena. I'm from southern Germany. I'm a bit older, and in my perception, there was something new in the 70s when the first families came. Groups of young men with small kids after work, hanging around, sitting around, and chatting with one another. And they had their little kids jumping around. I remember seeing that and thinking, that's amazing. And, fathers being interested in their small children, this is an issue that crosses community boundaries. It's important in all societies. And I'd be interested in knowing whether there are contacts to other groups of fathers and whether they can learn from one another, because I think it's really interesting involving fathers and involving men in raising children and taking care of children. Well, of course, there's a father group of the Heinrich Böll Foundation. There are contacts to their groups of men's groups. But comparatively, if we look at the projects for girls and women, it's really a developing country, what we've got here. What I'm trying to say is there are very, very few groups out there for men and for fathers. And I think we have to get better at this. And I'm really pleased that girls and women took the scepter early on and have created these groups. But we're very much at the start of this process, and this is why in Berlin alone there are 7 groups. But my intention in the next 2 years is to set up a group in every borough in the city for fathers, not just a group for Turkish fathers, but also a mixed group of fathers where we speak a common language, and the common language would be German. So that's my aspiration and my plan. I'm Isabelle Crespel from France, and I am full of admiration and respect for what you have presented here in terms of your experiences. But at the same time, I was also thinking that You're working together with the Turkish community that's in Germany, and France is a country where we still see a lot of violence, domestic violence, husbands against wives, fathers against children, etc. And France, a developed country, in 2016 tried to introduce a law to ban violence against children, but this law was approved, but 6 weeks later it was amended again. So what that means is that in our country it is still legal to hit children. So what kind of work do we still have to stop this kind of violence? And the model that you're pursuing is one that makes me think that, we as transactional analysts and psychologists, there are many of us here. There are lots of us offering therapy, and our founding father Bern wanted to pursue socio-psychology, and he wanted to have group therapy as an approach here. And what I'd like to say is that this wonderful tool that we have is psychotherapy, group psychotherapy, where we can use our capacities to contribute to combating violence.
Da bin ich zu 100% Ihrer Meinung.
Well, I agree with you entirely. I think it's absolutely true that one should make every effort to connect across country borders, to roll out projects that have worked well and stood the test of time. But whether or not a country is well developed or underdeveloped, I don't think any of that has a great deal to do with violence, because violence has been on this planet since human beings have been on this planet. And violence crosses all ethnic and religious and language barriers. Violence is a global problem, one that needs to be solved by all of us. Every small step is a step in the right direction. And whether we're in France or Germany, Spain, Turkey, or wherever we are, we have to be sensitized. And we have to have the necessary knowledge and skills. The very fact that violence exists in a community, knowing that there's violence, knowing that so and so many women have experienced violence, isn't enough. It's not enough to talk about it. We have to act as well. And that has to be the direction that we're going in.
Hallo, mein Name ist Bettina.
Hi, I'm Bettina.
Ich arbeite in einer Rehabilitation.
I work in a rehabilitation clinic in Austria.
In der Klinik kommen immer wieder
And
türkische Patienten.
we regularly have Turkish patients coming to us. And in working with the Turkish men, I am amazed how well this works. And I would agree with you entirely that they're very able to open themselves. Working with the female Turkish patients, I often encounter one problem, and that is that they are suffering because on the one hand they have a desire for freedom and autonomy, and on the other hand there are these cultural expectations of them within the Turkish community, within their family. So if I strengthen them in their desire to have autonomy, I am also bringing them at risk. There's a risk. So can you help me can you think of a way of working with these Turkish women without changing their surroundings?
I
have to say, I don't think I understood half of what you said, but perhaps I'll say 2 or 3 things about it all the same. I think I should say that we must never forget that it is the mothers and it is the women who make the Turkish men into pashas as well. with all due respect for being a mother, for being a woman. But if a woman, age 3, sends her son out of the kitchen and says, "You don't belong in the kitchen, go away, you don't belong here." If a mother locks her 12-year-old daughter at home and says, "You're a girl, you shouldn't be on the streets at all," then unfortunately that's the mother who is already creating pashas. So we have to start right there. We have to work with the Turkish mothers and women, or for women who lack the knowledge or skills, we have to talk to them as well, and actively and intensely talk to them about education. So we have to work with women and men and enter into a dialogue with all of them and look at how our parents raised us, what did our parents teach us, and what is appropriate for the modern age, what should we retain and continue, and what should we jettison? What do we need to get rid of? And I call this speaking on an equal footing, working on the assumption of the positive and working positively to reach achievement. So we have to be careful what we say, pay attention to our tongues. Our tongues are made of soft meat, but they can also be the hardest stone in the world if we're not careful. So we have to use love and affection and not accusations. Together, that's important. And this starts at birth. At pregnancy, in fact, socialization of a child begins. And that's where we have to speak with women in small groups. That would be my recommendation.
Okay. Hello, I am Mirna Abiad. I come from Lebanon. I have been very much touched by your intervention. I would like to share with you and with the audience an idea. In transactional analysis, we talk about strokes as a way to recognize and reinforce behavior, positive behavior. I would like to stroke the many men present in this audience who are sweet partners and tender fathers. I believe that giving such recognition to our partners would be a good way to encourage such behavior. And for me, that would be my way of bringing back a bouquet of flowers to my own husband upon my return.
Ich teile Ihre Meinung ganz und voll.
I absolutely agree with what you just said. I believe, or at least I hope, that in 50, 60 years, we won't even be talking about what divides us, but that we'll only be saying, my partner, be they man or woman. And I believe we have to work in that direction. And in this room here, whether I'm looking at men or women, I see the most wonderful people in the world. And I believe these people can really change things if we stay in a dialogue and talk with one another.
I see many more hands coming up. Like I said, I will bring a question to you, to the audience, as well as to you. And then I think we have time for 3 more questions. I can't remember. Many people are showing up over there. Please show up and just show me the hands so, we have to make a selection here. So how do you help the people with the racism they may face? Is racism a part of what's going on into the groups you are leading?
Rassismus ist auch unser Dauerthema.
Racism is an ongoing issue for us, and if people have been unable to pursue their dreams, have been unable to realize their dreams, they can very quickly just cut themselves off from everyone, from the world. And I'm often dealing with people like this. If they can't fulfill a dream, a wish, they very quickly say, the Germans are all racists. And that's something we talk about regularly. Let me give you a specific example. When Thilo Sarrasen's book, Germany is Getting Rid of Itself, a book that was very anti-immigrant, very anti-ethnic minority, many people from ethnic communities felt that 90% of Germans were racist. And I have to say that many of my German countrymen, or 60% of them, thought that after 25 years in Germany, Muslims would conquer Germany without any war. These were the kinds of impressions that were flying around after that. This is the kind of fear people have of the other, of different groups, if you don't communicate with one another. I'm afraid that we still live in parallel communities. We miss each other. We're sort of above or below or beside one another, but we don't actually engage with one another. We don't coexist properly. You know what I mean? And I think that's what we have to start with. I think communication is key. Just communicate, communicate, communicate. And I also invite my German countrymen to come along from communities, from public administration, from churches, to come along and help dismantle some of the fear on both sides. And I think if you enter into a dialogue, it's possible to tackle some of these difficult subjects and really talk about them. And this is a very important focus of the work in my association. Perhaps I could just tell you a little brief story. I'm a teacher. I teach vocational training in the building trade, and I've had lots of Turkish groups. And when I, with two other lesbian teachers, outed ourselves as lesbians, they said, well, what's the problem? Here women can become mayors. So you do get very different responses. At our school, we had a real increase in people's enthusiasm to learn when we had two Turkish teachers. So what are your experiences? The people who do this work, is it really necessary for ethnic Germans to be involved, or is it perhaps more important to have people from ethnic minorities to be more credible? Well, I would say, of course, we need to have experts who speak another language and who come from different backgrounds, but not at any price. We don't, what's important is the skill set, the qualification, not just the background. It's not the case that everyone who has an immigration background is a wonderful teacher. Not all engineers who have a German background are the best ones. It's about whether or not you can deal with other people, whether you can cope with them. I have got to know many people from ethnic minorities in areas that they worked. Sometimes they were a disaster.
Also, I know many people from Germany who also are not able to live up to the tasks put in front of them. So it depends on the individual preconditions, on the individual deposition of a person. Also, I think in the 21st century it was quite humiliating for me as a person that people decide on who should do which jobs based on where they come from. We should focus on the quality. We should focus on the skill set of a person. So I don't think that a quota for migrants isn't really helpful. It's important who is doing what and who has got what skill set. That's the decisive point.
I'm sorry to say there's time for one more question. And this goes to you.
Hello, I'm Carol Shadbolt from the UK. I honour your work. I have a question for you. In the future, probably, how are you able to address homophobia and internalised homophobia in your groups and teach freedom of sexuality to men and women?
Wir haben mindestens 10-mal Vertreter von
We have had representatives of the gay lesbian community with us. We've had them with us at least 10 times. We have informed people about this. Only 3 weeks ago, we had a doctor from Turkey. She's an immigrant from Turkey, from Austria. And we talked to her for 2.5 hours. Also, we have got a lot of homosexual Turkish men who have been forced into marriage because they had not been able to out themselves. So their parents married them in Turkey. And for them, they just weren't able to live up to that pressure. So after they had 1, 2, or 3 children, they broke out. They left their wives, or they had to leave their wives. And that is a major problem. This is also a problem we address. I also counsel those men. And that is another important focal point in our work, that we talk to the men about the private sphere or sexual orientation of a person, and that is a private thing, that we have to respect it, that we have to respect it. And we also talk about that. I am married, I've got 2 daughters, and I don't know whether the path which I embarked on is the right path. And who can confirm me that I'm on the right path? So, this is always important to talk about these things. Don't worry. We talk about all the important topics, including homophobia.
Ich wollte das T-Shirt Ihnen offiziell schenken. Ja. Ich kann Ihnen leider nicht allen ein Geschenk
Unfortunately, I can't give all of you a gift. But my blue T-shirt, I will give it to Mr. Gack on behalf of all of you.
Ja. Und